Well, it is perhaps fitting that a film about Michael Jackson has already sparked some debate and some controversy. The so-called King of Pop is both like a beloved musical artist and just a complicated individual. And so the question is, can this long-awaited biopic do justice to both of those aspects of his life? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So I should say right from the start that I'm not necessarily like a huge Michael Jackson fan. I think, like most people, his music is great, but it's just not a part of like my regular playlist or anything like that. So while I'm not like a lifelong super fan, I was interested in this movie and just learning a bit more about him. And ultimately, I left the theater with fairly mixed feelings. I think there are like many possible approaches to take in exploring a life as like singular as Michael Jackson, but for better or worse, depending on what you want, this movie largely takes the path of least resistance. Enjoyable, although largely one note and very much moonwalking around any of the more like controversial aspects of his life, Michael is more like a crowd-pleasing celebration of Michael Jackson's music than any sort of like nuanced introspection of the artist himself. I think offering an occasionally thrilling but shallow spectacle. I think just in general, biopics are often like a tricky genre for filmmakers to get right. I think largely because audiences' sort of expectations may vary. I think these films can seek either to like humanize the larger-than-life figures or to like further build up their mythology. And director Antoine Fuqua definitely elects like the latter path here. There's an almost like storybook quality to the film, particularly during Jackson's like childhood years, with some like tone-setting kind of early scenes that are filmed with just like a really warm and like nostalgic glow. There are obviously some like complicated chapters of Michael Jackson's story, but director Antoine Fuqua steers well clear of them, and I think instead gives at least the target audience what they likely want most, and that is lots of music, dance, and spectacle, and a very like reverent, although familiar depiction of a genius artist misunderstood by the world and destined for greatness. And to be clear, any shortcomings with this film derive from like the story and the approach, not from the production, because this film looks and sounds great and the performances are all solid. Michael Jackson is portrayed by Jafar Jackson, who is Michael Jackson's like real world nephew, which I just think is pretty cool. And I think he's excellent too, managing to like embody his uncle's distinctive mannerisms and dances. As expected, the soundtrack delivers as well. Even with like a 2-hour and I think 10-minute runtime, it's unable to fit in all of the hit songs, although it does help that the film only covers like the earlier portion of his career. But just like the musical sequences themselves are just super immersive. And what I like about them is it's not only that they kind of capture Michael Jackson's iconic performances, but also just the like experience of the crowd, kind of allowing audiences to almost like vicariously be swept up in like the emotion and the mania of his stardom. As hoped, I think when focused on the music, Michael as a movie soars, but I do think it does lose some momentum whenever like too much time elapses between those performances, because outside of the music, the film is almost surprisingly one note. The central conflict is Jackson's desire for freedom from his like domineering father, and I think perhaps due to the film's reluctance to just explore like too deeply into Michael's personality, there's just like a frustrating lack of progression. And like the scenes between Michael and his father, which I do think are really effective early on, quickly become repetitive, just hammering home the same points and emotions. As far as like the other relationships, I think actress Nia Long, who portrays Michael's mother, gives one of the film's best and I think like unsung performances, including I think the standout and like heartfelt scene between the two of them in a hospital room. And moments like these do I think give an intriguing glimpse into Michael's inner conflict, but for much of the film, he has just kept too much at like arm's length and left isolated rather than being put on center stage. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, really not a whole lot. For language, that's maybe where the most content comes from. There are around, 10 to 15 profanities, with many of them kind of clustered in a single scene, including multiple uses of the S word, as well as utterances of words starting with A, D, and H, and you also have God's name used at least once. For violence, there are several scenes in which a young Michael is abused and beaten by his father with a belt. For sexuality, nothing really outside of just some of Michael Jackson's dance moves can be quite suggestive. And there also is like a joking comment that where one of his brothers says that they might be playing their own game of Twister with his hot date. One other kind of content thing just to, I thought to make note of is that Michael Jackson actually grew up in like a Jehovah Witness faith, which I didn't realize until this movie. So there are several like allusions to that with characters quoting from scripture, particularly Matthew 5:16 about kind of letting your light shine before others. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface, although like never, as far as I know, officially convicted of a crime, I think for many people, Michael Jackson's legacy is colored, at least in part, by accusations of abuse and like child exploitation in his later years. And as I've said, the film doesn't really address these possibilities other than arguably like pushing back against that narrative with like a frequent emphasis on Michael's wholesome relationships with young children. But what the film does explore is how Michael was himself a victim of child exploitation. There's an early scene in which like a young dewy-eyed Michael on the cusp of stardom is caught between some sort of like power play tug of war between his like controlling father and his eager music producer, and that becomes sort of the tragic theme of his life. Because throughout his career, many other men come and go, all seeming to want to like hitch a ride to his fame and fortune. And Michael is depicted as a sort of like eternal child, symbolized by the Peter Pan story that he loved so much, just that I couldn't grow up. And I think like a central thesis of the film is just the implication that Michael's childishness is the result of having been unable to have experienced a normal childhood as the result of like adults exploiting him for his talents. Of course, whether like Michael Jackson is the appropriate vessel to explore these themes will obviously be up to the viewer, but I do think Christians can affirm the message itself. Jesus often spoke in defense of the innocence and like, importance of childhood and condemned those who would exploit others for their own gain. So I think in that way, Michael is a tragic and I think sadly timely reminder of just the dehumanizing cost of exploitation and just our like sinful human tendency to prey upon the weak and vulnerable. So overall, I enjoyed Michael as just a reminder of his musical greatness, but was just left wishing for at least a little bit more. Not necessarily more details or like moments of his career, but just a bit more like depth and insight into the man behind those moments. And there's a scene in this film in which Michael Jackson informs his manager that he doesn't want to do any press interviews for his new album because he desires to remain mysterious. And I think that sentiment is appropriate for the film itself. The music and the dancing are entertaining, but beyond sort of the on-stage performances, there's just a nagging sense that this film is not really like about anything. I think fans of Michael Jackson will likely enjoy just this celebration of his music, but to me, I think the biggest shortcoming in Michael is that it makes Michael Jackson seem just like any other artist on a musical journey that we've seen countless times before, and that is just something that could never be said about the man himself. But hey, I would love to hear what you think. If you're a big fan of his music or you just want to see a good biopic, don't be shy, jump into the comment section, let's have a conversation about it. If you haven't done so too, I encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a collider, got lots of other movie reviews, got our faith and pop culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching, stay safe, and continue to collide with your world for Christ.